Ma, I already told Marcus I was coming. We planned it 2 weeks ago.
Not today, Daniel. Stay home.
You never let me go anywhere. Marcus has been waiting. His mom already said yes.
I understand, Daniel.
I will be back before dark. I promise.
Because I said so, Daniel. Please, stay home today.
The morning started the way it always did in the Osei household. The smell of warm porridge drifting through the hallway, the sound of a ceiling fan turning slowly above a kitchen that never quite cooled down, no matter the season, and the voice of a mother, firm, patient, unhurried, calling up the stairs for the third time. Daniel, it is time. Daniel Osei was 11 years old and absolutely certain that he knew everything worth knowing. He was bright. His teachers said so constantly, with the kind of exhausted admiration that educators reserve for children who are clever enough to argue their way out of anything. He was quick on his feet, quick with words, and quick to decide that any rule his mother made was one he had not yet agreed to. His mother, Grace Osei, was a quiet woman. Not quiet in the way of someone who has nothing to say. Quiet in the way of someone who has learned that the most important things are said once, clearly, and then lived, not repeated until they lose their shape. She worked the early shift at the hospital laundry, pressing other people's sheets before the sun was fully up, and she was home by midday with tired hands and a full heart. She was the kind of mother who knew things before she could explain how she knew them. That Saturday morning in late October, she stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky the way people watch it when something is wrong but they cannot name it yet. The clouds were sitting too low. The air had a stillness to it that felt less like peace and more like waiting. She had lived in that neighborhood for 14 years, and she knew its moods the way she knew her son's face, every shift, every shadow, every small sign that something was about to change. She called up the stairs again. "Daniel, I need you to stay inside today." He appeared at the top of the stairs in his yellow shirt and his good sneakers, already dressed, already decided, already halfway out the door in his mind. His backpack was on. His face wore the particular expression of a child who has made up his mind and is simply waiting for the conversation to be over. "Ma, I already told Marcus I was coming. We planned it 2 weeks ago." Grace looked at her son for a long moment. She looked at the way he was standing, the set of his jaw, the impatience in his hands. Something in her chest tightened in a way she could not explain. "Not today, Daniel," she said. "Some other time. Stay home." He came down the stairs slowly, the way he did when he was about to negotiate. He sat at the kitchen table and put his hands flat on it, a gesture she recognized from his father, God rest him, a man who had also believed that every argument had a winning side. "You never let me go anywhere," Daniel said. "Marcus has been waiting. His mom already said yes. I will be back before dark, I promise." Grace turned from the window and looked at her son. She wanted to explain the tightness in her chest, the feeling that had woken her at 4 in the morning and kept her awake until 6, staring at the ceiling in the dark, the way the sky looked through the window, the way the neighborhood had been feeling lately, loud in a way that had nothing to do with sound, full in a way that had nothing to do with people. But she did not know how to put any of it into words that an 11-year-old would accept. So she said the only thing she had. "Because I said so, Daniel. Please, stay home today." He left 20 minutes later. She heard the front door close. She heard his footsteps on the porch. She stood at the window and watched him walk down the street in his yellow shirt, his backpack bouncing, his head already turned to wherever Marcus lived, wherever the morning was waiting for him. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. "Come back safe," she whispered to the window, to no one, to God, to the part of herself that already knew something she did not want to know. Before we go any further, I need to take just a moment. I want to be honest with you. I started this channel because I believe stories matter. Not just entertainment, but the kind of stories that sit with you, that make you think about your mother, that make you hold your children a little tighter, that remind you why warnings exist and why love sometimes sounds like the word no. My friend told me I was wasting my time, that nobody wants to sit and listen to stories like these anymore. Maybe he's right, but you were here, which means something. If this story is touching you, if you felt something when Grace pressed her hand against that glass, please subscribe to Masked Folklore right now. Leave a like. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Let us build something real together, something worth staying for. Now, let us go back to Daniel, because the morning is about to take a turn nobody was ready for. Marcus lived 4 blocks in a yellow house with a broken gate that was always open anyway. Daniel had been walking those 4 blocks since he was 8 years old and had never once felt afraid of them. This neighborhood was not dangerous to him, it was simply home. He found Marcus in the backyard, kicking a ball against a concrete wall in a rhythm that had no purpose except to fill the morning with noise. They greeted each other the way 11-year-old boys greet each other, with shoulder bumps and mild insults and the kind of wordless comfort that comes from years of the same shared boredom. Marcus's older brother, Kofi, was there too, 17, broad-shouldered, in possession of a bicycle and an attitude that suggested he had seen things Daniel had not. Kofi barely looked at him when they arrived. "They're doing something at the old yard on Clement Street," Kofi said to no one particular, "if you want to watch." Daniel had heard about the old yard. Everyone had. It was a stretch of empty land behind a row of abandoned buildings 3 streets over, the kind of place that existed in every neighborhood, the kind that adults pointed at and said nothing about, and children talked about in low voices because the silence of adults is its own kind of invitation. He felt Marcus look at him. They both knew what Grace Osei had said that morning. They both knew it didn't apply here, not really, because this was just 3 streets over, and nothing was going to happen, and they would be back before anyone even noticed they were gone.
This is the thought that every child has in the moment before the moment that changes everything. It will be fine. I will be back before anyone notices. Nothing is going to happen. Psychologists who study childhood decision-making call this optimism bias, the documented human tendency to believe that bad things are statistically likely to happen to other people, but not to us. Studies show that optimism bias is at its strongest in children between the ages of 8 and 14, when the brain's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for assessing risk and projecting consequences, is still years from full development. Children in this age range are not being reckless out of cruelty or stupidity. They're being reckless because the part of their brain that calculates danger is literally still under construction. Daniel Osei was 11 years old. His brain was under construction, and he followed Kofi down the alley toward Clement Street. Have you ever ignored a warning because you were sure you knew better? Keep listening. The old yard on Clement Street was larger than Daniel had imagined. It stretched between 2 buildings like a held breath, a wide, weed-covered expanse of cracked concrete and broken glass, with a rusted fence running along one side and a back wall of an abandoned warehouse running along the other. There were maybe 30 people there, mostly older boys, teenagers, some men whose ages Daniel could not read. They stood in loose groups, talking quietly, in the way people talk when they're waiting for something. Daniel stayed close to Marcus. He could feel the weight of the place immediately. Not danger exactly, not yet, but a density in the air, the way a room feels when too many people are breathing in it. A feeling he recognized from the one time his uncle had taken him to a boxing match, the pressure of a crowd that wants something to happen. It started the way violence always starts in places like that, with words, then movement, then the horrible speed of something that cannot be taken back. 2 boys on the far side of the yard, A disagreement that had been building for days, weeks, maybe longer. A crowd that leaned in instead of stepping back. The particular social physics of a group of young men, each one unwilling to be the first to walk away. Daniel did not see the first blow. He heard it, a sound that was less like impact and more like the silence that follows impact, the sudden absence of conversation, the sharp collective intake of breath from 30 people at once. Then everyone was moving. Not in one direction, in every direction. Daniel grabbed Marcus by the sleeve, and they ran, not toward home, not right away, because running requires knowing which way is safe, and in that moment nothing was clear, nothing was still. The whole yard was chaos and noise, and the terrible confusion of a child in a situation that his mother had already seen coming. He found a gap in the rusted fence. He pushed through it. He felt the metal catch his yellow shirt and tear it from the shoulder to the pocket, a long diagonal rip that he would have to explain later. He ran down an alley he had never been in before, his heart slamming in his chest, Marcus somewhere behind him, the noise of the yard fading, but not fast enough. He ran until his legs gave out. He sat down on the curb of a street he did not recognize and pressed his forehead to his knees and breathed. He was not hurt, not physically, but he sat on that curb for a long time. And in the silence of that unfamiliar street, with his torn shirt and his shaking hands and the sound of his own heartbeat finally slowing, Daniel Osei thought about his mother standing at the kitchen window, about her hand pressed flat against the glass, about the word please, which she had used, which she almost never used, which he had walked past on his way out the door as though it were furniture. What would you do if the warning you ignored was the one that mattered most? Let us continue. He walked home. It took 23 minutes, and he counted every one. He walked past Marcus's house without stopping. He walked past the school. He walked past the corner where the old man always sat with his newspaper and his coffee and his unhurried assessment of everything that passed. The old man looked at Daniel's torn shirt and said nothing, which was somehow worse than anything he could have said. The front door of the Osei house was unlocked. It was always unlocked when Grace was home. Daniel stood on the porch for a long moment with his hand on the door handle. Inside, he could hear the television, the low murmur of a midday program, voices discussing things that had nothing to do with torn shirts or old yards or the horrible sound of something that cannot be taken back. The smell of lunch, the ordinary domestic smell of a home that had been waiting for him. He opened the door. Grace was in the kitchen. She turned when she heard him come in. She looked at his face first, the way mothers always look at faces before they look at anything else, and whatever she saw there made her set down the spoon she was holding very carefully, the way you set down something fragile. Then she looked at the shirt, the long diagonal tear from shoulder to pocket. She looked at it for a moment without speaking. Daniel waited for the anger. He had prepared for the anger on the walk home, had rehearsed it, catalogued it, braced himself for it the way you brace for cold water. He knew what it would look like. He had seen it before. It did not come. What came instead was something he was not prepared for. Grace crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and wrapped both arms around her son so tightly that he could feel her heartbeat against his chest. Fast, still fast, the heart of a woman who had been afraid for 3 hours and was only now beginning to let the fear go. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say anything for a long time. She just held him, standing in the kitchen with the spoon on the counter and the television murmuring in the other room and the afternoon light coming through the window that she had stood at that morning with her hand pressed against the glass. Daniel felt the hug the way you feel something when you finally understand what it is. This was not discipline. This was not anger, not punishment, not the satisfaction of having been right. This was a woman who had known, in that quiet way that some people know things before they can explain them, that her child was going to walk into danger, who had asked him not to go, who had watched him leave anyway, who had spent 3 hours in a kitchen that felt too large and too quiet, pressing her hands together and talking to God and watching the front door. This was love that had been terrified and was now barely relief. Scientists at Cleveland Clinic have confirmed what Grace Osei already knew in her body. A mother's intuition is a documented neurological phenomenon. When a mother spends thousands of hours with her child, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, is released consistently, creating a neurological connection that sharpens her ability to detect changes, sense danger, and know when something is not right long before the conscious mind can articulate it. It is not mystical. It is the brain, rewired with love, operating at a frequency that logic cannot always follow. Grace Osei had not known exactly what was going to happen on Clement Street that Saturday morning in October. She had only known that her son should not be there. That was enough. It was always enough, and he had walked past it on his way out the door. Have you ever realized too late that someone who loved you was trying to protect you? One more chapter. He told her everything that night. Not because she demanded it. She never demanded things. She asked once, quietly, over a bowl of rice and stew that she had kept warm on the stove, and Daniel told her. The yard, the crowd, the sound of the first blow, the running, the fence, the alley where he sat on the curb with his forehead on his knees and breathed. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment.
Then Grace said, "That old yard has been wrong for a long time. I have felt it every time I walk past. Some places hold things that happen in them. The walls remember. The ground remembers. I did not know what was going to happen today, but I knew it was not a place for you." Daniel looked at his hands. "How did you know?" he asked. "How do you always know?" Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because you are mine, and because I pay attention, and because when something in me says no, I have learned to listen to it, even when I cannot explain it, even when I look like I am being unreasonable." She looked at him steadily. "I am not always going to be able to explain myself to you, Daniel. You are going to grow up, and there will be moments when I say no, and you will not understand why. I need you to know something. Every no I have ever given you came from the same place, from love, from attention, from 14 years of watching you and learning you, and knowing you in a way nobody else on this earth knows you. When I say no, it is not because I want to control you. It is because I have already seen something you have not seen yet." Daniel said nothing for a long time. The television was off. The kitchen light was warm and low. Outside, the neighborhood had settled into its evening sounds, distant voices, a car somewhere, the specific quiet of a Saturday night in a place that has already spent its energy. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said finally. Grace nodded once. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "I know you are," she said. "Now eat your food before it gets cold." The shirt was beyond saving. Grace cut it into rags for the kitchen. Every time Daniel saw one of those yellow rags on the counter over the following weeks, he felt the same thing. Not embarrassment, not quite shame, but something quieter than both. A reminder. The particular kind of memory that lives in the body rather than the mind, that arrives without warning when you are not expecting it, that asks you a question you already know the answer to.
He did not stop being the child he was. He was still quick and clever and certain about things. He still argued with his mother on Tuesday mornings about whether he needed a jacket. He still pushed back, still tested, still moved toward the edges of whatever boundaries were in front of him, because that is what 11-year-olds do, and then 12-year-olds, and then teenagers, and it is not a flaw. It is the work of becoming a person. But something had shifted. When Grace said no after that, he paused before he pushed back. Just a pause, a breath, a moment in which he heard something different in the word than he had heard before. Not restriction, not control, attention, love, the quiet and steady knowledge of a woman who had been watching him since before he could walk, who had learned to read him the way she read the sky through the kitchen window, slowly, carefully, with 14 years of practice and a heart that was paying attention even when he thought nobody was. He still did not always listen, but he always heard her, and there's a difference. The truth at the end. There is a reason that every culture on earth, across every language and every century, has stories about children who do not listen to their mothers. Not because disobedience is unusual, but because the love that issues those warnings is. Researchers who study the mother-child bond have found that the attachment formed between a mother and her child in the first years of life, what psychologist John Bowlby called the secure base, shapes everything that comes after. The child who has that secure base moves into the world with more confidence, more resilience, more capacity to come back from difficulty. And the warnings that come from that base, the quiet no's, the stay home todays, the I cannot explain it but please trust me, are not the voice of fear. They are the voice of someone paying closer attention than anyone else ever will. A mother's no is not a wall, it is a door she is holding open. The question is whether you will walk through it before you walk into the thing she was protecting you from. Daniel Osei grew up. He became, by all accounts, a careful man, a man who paused before he spoke, a man who listened to the quiet voice in him that sounded, when he was honest about it, exactly like his mother. Grace Osei still stands at her kitchen window on mornings when the sky sits too low and the air has that particular stillness. She still presses her palm against the glass sometimes. She does not always know what she is feeling. She only knows it is real. She only knows it is love. And she only knows that when it speaks, it is always worth listening to, even if you have to learn it the hard way, especially then. If this story reached you tonight, if it made you think of a warning you ignored, a mother you underestimated, a moment when you walked past a no that was trying to save you, then it did what it was meant to do. Stories are not just entertainment, they are mirrors. They show us who we have been and who we still have time to become. They remind us that love does not always come dressed in sweetness and permission. Sometimes it comes in the voice at the top of the stairs, the hand pressed against the glass, the quiet, firm, unhurried word that asks you one more time to stay. Thank you for listening to Masked Folklore. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please like this video and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Every subscriber, every like, every comment tells us that this matters, that you are here, that stories like this one have a place in this world. We'll see you in the next one.